So we're going to be talking about our development of our autism specific quality of life assessment used with autistic adults. I would just like to start before I go on to acknowledge my co-lead, Dr. Wen Lawson, who was in the previous presentation, and also Miss Rebecca Kosminski, who's going to be doing the second part of the presentation today. Rebecca's PhD is very strongly aligned to this project. Also like to acknowledge the rest of our team, Professor Sonia Girdler, Dr. Marita Falkmer, and Professor Sven Bolte. So I suppose just kind of thinking about the importance of quality of life and how it actually influences how we look at everyday life, how we actually start to kind of think about what drives us, what motivates us. I think it's also really important that throughout this presentation, I will be referring to people as autistic adults, and I know there was a comment that came up about the community, and that's very much how people want to be referred to. So I think it's really important to kind of prescribe to that. I think if we look at the work that's kind of out there, and particularly some work that was done, I think in sort of 2016, 2017, when we start to think about things such as mortality rates and the relationship between quality of life and how that influences how people go about their day-to-day life, they were saying, well, there's not really much out there. And I think this is so important, in particular relevance to National Disability Insurance Scheme and funding. You know, there's a lot of discussion at the moment around functioning, but what is it that actually contributes to quality of life? How might people perceive it, how they might kind of understand it? And again, there's been very little work in trying to understand how we look at quality of life. There's a gentleman in the UK, Jeremy Parr, who's kind of started that work. So we're very, very fortunate to kind of put forward a proposal to the Autism CRC to say, well, okay, look, this is actually something really important, and if we are going to start doing this, then we actually need to think about what's influencing quality of life. And we know historically that autistic adults, the autistic community, do have difficulty or poorer outcomes in higher education, in independent living, in positive mental health outcomes, and all of these things contribute to quality of life. So I would like to now just hand over to Rebecca, who's going to talk a little bit more about the actual project and certainly how we framed it within a co-production lens.
Thanks, Ben. So we did try to use a co-production model throughout our project, and what we've really done is we've established a steering group of 5 autistic adults. The reasons for doing this is that it improves the quality of the research, it makes the results more impactful, and it also provides some empowerment to the community by ensuring that we're working on things that are important to them. So initially we set out by talking to autistic researchers who are also involved in the project and discussing how we could look at the Autism CRC's co-production guidelines and utilise the principles within that and involve these in our project. So along with our consumer advocate, we got a group of autistic adults through recruiting through the Consumer Community Health Research Network. And they've been involved throughout the project, and I'll sort of discuss how as we talk about the different studies we've been doing. It was really important to us, though, that before we started meeting with the group, that we built some rapport before that first meeting, and that we really considered the environments in which we meet, making sure that when we meet, it's in a location that's comfortable for everybody, preferably not in a space like one of the meeting rooms that we use for our meetings at Curtin, somewhere that would make everybody feel equal. We've also been able to involve community members who are not just in the local community, but in the broader community, like in regional areas of the country as well. So the first study that we've undertaken as part of this project is a quality of life interview study. So our objective was to identify aspects of the life story of autistic adults, which they perceive to be most important in contributing to their quality of life. So this was a semi-structured interview, and we utilised an interview guide which was developed with our steering committee. So we agreed on all of the questions together and spent a lot of time redeveloping the questions so that everybody was comfortable with them. We then recruited adults aged 18 to 55 years to take part in this interview study. We selected this age range due to the limits in sampling participants over 55 years of age, which we saw through the Australian Bureau of Statistics and also the Australian Longitudinal Study of Adults with Autism, or the ALSA study, also run through the CRC. We recruited participants through Curtin Autism Research Group, Therapy Focus, a provider here in Western Australia, and the Autism Open Day held by Curtin University and Telethon Kids Institute, and conducted 28 interviews. Each participant had access to the interview guide before we begun the interviews, just to give them some predictability about the interview. And those interviews were conducted however was most comfortable for the participants. So they were either in person, via video call, phone call, or even instant messaging. We've begun analysis using interpretive phenomenological analysis. And so far, the findings that we've started to see is that passions were very, very important to quality of life. So much so that some people reported restructuring their schedule in their day so that they could fit their passion in at some point. Relationships were also reported to be extremely important to quality of life, as well as sensory preferences. So from here, we then undertook a photo voice study with the same objective in mind. And now photo voice is a method in which you ask participants to take photos of something in a particular topic, and then a discussion involves about the meaning of that photo and its relation to the topic. So we recruited participants through our first interview study, as well as through other social media groups, and was really fantastic. We were able to design this method with our steering group, particularly one member of the steering group who is a photographer himself. And we were able to design how long would people be able to take photos for, would we put parameters around how many photos people would provide, and all of those things, and then produced a video which provided all of this information, including how the analysis and the interview sort of phases would be undertaken with the person as well. So that person and I made this video, and this was then sent to everybody prior to starting their photo taking. The photo taking period was up to 3 months, and each participant provided up to 20 photos. Following this, we held 2 focus groups in which each participant brought 3 of their photos that they were comfortable sharing with a group. We then took the time to discuss the meaning of each photo one by one, and the participant had the opportunity to provide an idea of what themes they thought what they were portraying in the photo, and that was important for them to share with us. After that, they provided a title, and the group also had an opportunity to reflect on what the person had talked about and ask questions about other themes they thought could have been relevant to their particular photo. With the remaining photos of the people who had taken part in the focus group, but also for people who weren't comfortable to take part in a focus group, an individual interview was conducted as well, where again we went through the same process of identifying the meaning in the photos and themes. So I have an example here of one of the participants' photos, and you can see there is the title of the photo. This is a brief description, although the conversation was quite detailed. This is a summary of the description, and then the themes that were identified by the person and also the focus group that they were involved in. So the preliminary themes, again, we're in the process of analysing this data, but preliminary themes that we've seen is that relationships are very important to quality of life. For people who had established relationships that they were satisfied with, these were really positive, but also for people who weren't satisfied with their relationships, it was important to them to seek to establish more relationships with people. Both physical and mental health was discussed as being extremely important and impactful on quality of life, particularly if people experienced episodes of illness or more challenges with mental health. This had a rather negative impact on their quality of life. And passions again came up here, being a profoundly positive impact on quality of life. Participants reported, again, scheduling of their daily routines so that they could try and fit their passions in, but also that often the amount of time they spent engaging in their passions would change depending on how other areas of their life was impacting their quality of life. So for instance, if they were experiencing a period of increased mental distress, they might engage in their passions more, as this brought them more happiness. Socialization was also discussed as important. A lack of socialization was discussed as having a negative impact, and socializing in a predictable situation, as well as with people who are familiar and within a familiar environment, was also reported to have a very positive impact on quality of life. Multiple participants discussed how their identity and acceptance of their identity was very positive for their quality of life. And many also discussed sensory preferences and sensitivities that were impacting on their quality of life, and how their environments in which they worked and lived, if they were able to adapt to their sensory preferences and sensitivities, this improved their quality of life as well. So these themes are all important areas to include in a quality of life assessment going forward as we continue through this research. I'd also like to thank all of the people who have been involved, supervisors, other researchers involved on the project, of course our Lived Experience Steering Committee. And if there are any other questions, we would love for you to let us know during the Q&A.